This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. Welcome to the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. I'm your host, co-founder, and editorial director of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, Jamie Bogner. I'm here in Dania Beach, Florida, at Three Sons Brewing with Corey Artanis, the co-founder and head brewer of Three Sons. Welcome to the podcast, Corey.
Hey, Jamie. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Florida is an interesting and weird state. Obviously, it's one that I grew up in and was raised in and left about 20 years ago, and it's always fascinating to get back here and see what's going on. Three Sons has made a name for itself, brewing everything. I guess the biggest name that you built for yourself is brewing these rich and indulgent barrel-aged imperial stouts. But you've also branched into hazy IPAs and, of course, fruited sour beers, which are all the rage in this entire state in a cool and exciting way. But you also, which I found interesting, have have a significant focus in your taproom beers on traditional German styles of beer, and I can't wait to talk to you about that through the course of the podcast. Pick your brain as to how and why you approach those things in a way that makes sense for Florida drinkers and for the folks you're making beer for. We're going to dig into all of that, but before we do, as the brewing industry's premier choice for glycol chilling, G&D Chillers has set the standard on quality, service, and dedication to their customers' craft. G&D is committed to cold, whether you operate a brew pub or a large-scale production brewery. They're big enough to produce and small enough to care. Call G&D Chillers to discuss your project today or reach out directly at gndchillers.com. And on the roof here at Three Sons, you've got a G&D chiller, don't you, Corey?
Yes, we do. Absolutely. It's been pretty good. No problems yet. So it's been a workhorse, and the tech support is phenomenal.
Well, all right then. Also, Old Orchard invites you to step up your fruit game with their premium craft juice blends, whether you're planning a passion fruit kolsch, Concord sour, mango lager, or other fruity brew. Old Orchard can supply you with consistent product at affordable prices. Their blends are packed with real fruit and natural flavors with no added sugar or other weird fillers you'd find in knockoff brands. With the rising demand for fruity seltzers and brews, the time is ripe to grow your relationship with the right juice supplier. Get your Old Orchard sample kit today and a free 6-pack cooler at www.oldorchard.com/brewer.
Nice.
All right. So, Corey, let's talk a little bit about your brewing history, just to kick things off. As we normally start the podcast, we try to kind of map how you got to where you are today, operating, running, kind of creatively figureheading a craft brewery in southern Florida. Talk to me a little bit about your arc in brewing and that whatever that brought you here.
Sure. So I guess my first experience in craft beer was I was in the military, stationed out in south of Seattle, Washington, Fort Lewis. This was in 99, 2000. And so they had a pretty decent craft beer scene over there at that time. So I really was able to experience a whole bunch of different beers that I never knew existed or had before. And actually, at one point, a buddy of mine, he was from Sandpoint, Idaho, and we went and visited his family, and it was a pretty cool experience. His father was a home brewer, and I had no clue that home brewing was legal or there was even a thing. And so he brewed German lagers, and we had like an amazing meal and his beer and marinated in it and with spices and the potatoes and the whole 9 yards. And there's like elk walking down the road, and it was a pretty cool experience. But so I knew then, I was like, oh man, home brewing, I definitely want to do that because I'm pretty big into culinary. I love cooking, and so that was like really right up my alley. So I guess fast forward to 2006, I made my way down to South Florida here and bought my first homebrew kit, which was an extract kit, and I brewed my first beer in my girlfriend at the time house, which is now my wife. And I remember the carboy was in her bedroom because it was the coldest room in the house, and I made the stupid mistake of shaking it before primary fermentation started, and basically it blew the lid off of the carboy, and
Yeah.
so there's like a krausen and yeast all up the side of her wall and everything. So that was fun. But the beer came out good, which was most important.
She let you brew there again?
And that was second most important. She still let me brew. So so I just would brew for at that point. I was it was a hobby, brewed, and would brew for different family events.
Sure.
My sister's wedding, made a bottled beer for that, designed labels, my children's birthdays, and all that fun stuff. And then it got to the point where I was seeking out more and more new beers, and just was became consumed by brewing and listening to podcasts on the regular, and buying every new home brewing book, and I went to my first bottle share, which was one of the rules where you can't bring anything you can get locally, and except if you homebrewed, you could bring your own homebrew because it's something that you can't get. So anyway, so I brought some homebrew, and the guys just loved it, and they were surprised that I brewed the beer. And so I went to a couple more, and a buddy of mine, who actually is our lead bartender downstairs, he was like, hey, you should start brewing professionally. And so I started doing events. My first event I did was in Miami, and at a craft beer bar restaurant that no longer exists. But so anyways, that was October 24th, 2013. And that was the first event I did where I poured my pumpkin spice latte, which was a pretty big hit. And from there, I went to St. Petersburg. My father was out there with his significant other, and they saw this place called Brewer's Tasting Room. And they went in there, and I don't know if you've been out there, but the concept of it is homebrewers who want to go pro, they have a small professional setup in there, a little steam brewery that was actually a 1-barrel brew house, or 1.5 barrels. So so my father was in there, and he told the guy hey, my son probably would come out here, and he's really getting into brewing. And so they invited me out to try some of my beer, and I brought my pumpkin spice latte out there. And at the same time, I had emailed the guys at Cigar City because I was interested in pouring some beers at Hunahpu and the festival. So I emailed them. Justin Clark, who's the VP, he actually emailed me back, which I was shocked. And he's like, yeah, come on out and set you up with our brewers, give you the tour. I don't know about Hunahpu, but we'll, whatever, we'll see.
Sure.
And so I went out, brought beers, met the brewers, and ended up getting invited to Hunahpu Day, to pour my beers at Hunahpu Day.
As a home brewer.
As a home brewer, yeah. The brewers that were there, they tried the beer. They went and looked for Joey so he could come and try the beer. They looked for him a couple times, and I opened up a barrel aged wee heavy. That's one of Joey's favorite style, is the strong Scotch ales, and
Mine too.
yeah, they're pretty tasty. So I had a barrel aged version of that. They opened it up and they grabbed Joey. He tasted it. I asked him, and he was like, "Yeah, sure, we'll get you out here." So
nice.
So that was cool. And I brewed beer for Hunahpu Day at the Brewer's Tasting Room several years, because you had to have a distribution license.
Sure.
It had to be done legally. So that was kind of how everything just snowballed from there. I just continued to pour beer at different events. Other brewers I knew, we talked about collaborations, and then I started flying all over and doing collaborations with some of the best brewers in the world, and just kept getting my name out there. And so
that is one of the more interesting kind of avenues into this world of professional brewing, coming directly through that kind of homebrew and serving your homebrew and building a brand really, as homebrew, and then being able to take that directly into the kind of commercial world. But you took a lot longer to do that than some folks take to do that. Why wait as long as you did to end up here launching a full brewery with a pizza kitchen, so full restaurant in addition to brewery, bring a wide range of those kinds of styles?
There was several reasons. I guess the first one was just really like it was almost like a proof of concept thing with me just going out constantly and brewing at different events and venues and building a following, and it got to the point where it would probably, I would say, after I think it was the third year that we were pouring beer at Hunapu. The first year we poured was 2014, and in 2015 we won the best brewery and best beer for the festival that year. And then when we went back in 2016, and we won the best brewery, and we won first and second place for the best beer of the festival. And
these are beers you were brewing at Brewer's Table at the time?
The Brewer's Tasting Room, yeah.
Brewer's Tasting Room, yeah.
Yep. Yeah, so that was pretty wild. And at that point, it was like my father and I were like, okay, yeah, let's do this. So we really started getting serious at looking at locations. And one of the toughest things is finding a location when opening up a brewery. Usually it takes well over a year. In Florida, it was even more difficult because, we're pretty new into the brewery scene, and several cities that we approached, they didn't even have any zoning for breweries. So, we would have to go and establish all this with the city, and that was a process. So, like Dania Beach, they had no zoning for it. But so, and I had a location that I knew that I wanted to be. Because, like, as a home brewer and beer enthusiast, I would drive wherever I needed to get good beer. So I knew I wanted to be in, like, the crossroads were, like, the major highways, which is, like, in Florida's 595, takes you east and west, and then the 95, which is north and south. So we're pretty much right there, the 595 and 95. So we were looking in specific areas. Another hurdle with that is the tasting room. We knew we wanted to have a tasting room. So most of these zoned areas are zoned for light industrial. So they're primarily like warehouses. And when they're building warehouses, they're not the amount of parking spaces that they have for these warehouses is not like you would for a restaurant. It's like every 60 square feet. You need one parking space, and warehouses, it's usually like every 500 square feet, you need one parking space. So most of the places we looked at, they didn't have parking. The lease was just like ridiculous. It was like one thing after another. So it took us about a year and a half to find this location here. And we got very lucky with this spot because of the location, and just I love the inside, like the vibe in here, and I'm really happy with how everything came out in here. So, so that was time consuming.
Folks can't see it because we're talking about it, in audio right here, but incredibly high ceilings throughout the tap room. 20-something foot ceilings at least. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yep, 30.
30. Yep. Right. 30, so just a humongous, big, open, kind of spacious feel. And it kind of creates. And then there's layers to it. And we're on the upstairs right now. There's even a sub-basement kind of below the main floor. You have a kind of a range of space that a lot of folks in Florida don't end up with just because, they're not in this kind of facility.
Yeah. We're right by the airport, the Fort Lauderdale airport.
Right,
we're literally like a mile south of the airport. So it's definitely a great location. So once we found this spot, there was literally nothing. It was an empty warehouse. So we had to build, which is much more difficult building from the ground up, is retrofitting everything existing, and there was a lot of issues. And the building was built in the 40s.
Okay.
So it's, for Florida, that's kind of old.
Yeah.
And So yeah, so there was a lot of issues with just during the construction, and our architect wasn't, no one had built breweries before. Like, so it was,
Sure.
it was like,
Right.
so everyone, it was kind of starting from the beginning. So yeah, permitting obviously through the city took a fair amount of time, and everything just like added up. So we signed the lease here in December of 2015. And we opened up, I want to say about March of 2019.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was a long road.
I can't wait to. Actually, I don't want to hear any of that because that just sounds like a giant pain in the ass to get to where you are right now. And we should probably change gears and talk a little bit about the beer itself.
Sure.
Because that's what everybody wants to hear right now. But before we do that, the founders launched SS Brewtech with a very clear goal to advance brewing equipment, design, performance, and quality to the very highest standards of the industry. With a team that draws upon strong functional backgrounds in brewing science, mechanical engineering, industrial design, supply chain, and manufacturing, SS Brewtech has the people and skill sets you'd want and expect from your supplier of pro brewing equipment. Head over to ssbrewtech.com for more information on their brew houses and brewing gear. Also, did you know the breweries that serve food see an increase in revenue of 1.8x? Second Kitchen is a food tech startup that connects local breweries to iconic neighborhood restaurants to help provide your brewery with food experiences to keep customers in your taproom longer. Second Kitchen provides the technology support, custom menus, and more, all at no cost to your brewery. Go see them at secondkitchen.com. I don't mean to say, Corey, that I'm not interested in hearing all of the trials and tribulations from 2015 to 2019 that it takes to get a brewery up and running.
Yeah.
I just think that we could probably fill out an entire remainder of an episode just talking about that.
Yeah.
Let's instead talk a little bit about your approach to beer, which was that kind of marquee calling card, which was the thing that put you on the map with those festival goers at Hunapoo Day, and that kind of led to this whole brewery actually becoming a viable commercial entity. Talk to me a little bit about how you ended up making the kinds of beers you did, in particular some of these big barrel-aged strong beers, stouts, etc. How you found out inspiration for that, and what I'm actually most curious about, as you were even producing these on a homebrew scale, how did you achieve good barrel aging results with small volumes of beer in generally small barrels, I assume? And what was some of that approach that was able to deliver beers that of that kind of quality that were going to move audiences like this?
So I guess to start, when I first started brewing beer, I would brew beer that I like to drink, which
Sure.
Which was an awesome thing to be able to try to make different beers that you've had in the market, and you try to replicate. So once I would have to say I started exploring and trying other breweries' beers who were making some pretty wild and unique things, like Dogfish Head was one of the inspirations back in the day. Funky Buddha as well. They were making the maple bacon coffee and the Last Snow, which was like coconut coffee, and they had some really unique like gourmet style beers, and I really enjoyed drinking those beers and using ingredients on that level, adjuncts that were not just like grain and flavoring. So I pretty much always leaned towards to make like designing and brewing beers that were going to be more in like the gourmet and like unique and different and different styles of beers that weren't like your traditional in the box. This is the style. So I always like to brew beers that like to challenge people in trying beers as well, which was always a cool thing, because certain people, they didn't like stouts, or they didn't like a hoppy beer, and I always thought it was pretty cool when I could give someone like one of my beers and be like, oh, well, you don't like stouts, well, here, try my stout. and people, some people would love them, and I would send beers like trading, and I'd send some my homebrew. And I remember like my pumpkin spice latte was like people who didn't drink beer at all. Like my people would be like, oh, my wife doesn't drink beer, or I hate beer, and they tried and they're like, what the hell? They're like, this is, I can drink this, or anyone can drink it. So it was always cool to be able to make styles of beer like that where really anyone could drink. And
the flavors were common to them, even if the beer and the styles were not common to them. And so human beings have these kinds of common. And I think the same thing can be said of the kind of Florida sour beers and tropical flavors. People understand these things. They have a nostalgic connection to them in some ways, or they just have a familiarity which kind of speaks to them around these kinds of things and makes it accessible for them.
Definitely. So that's kind of how I got into making beers that were like very flavorful and rich and and unique. And then again, trying different beers at bottle shares and really just like experiencing new styles. I remember the first barrel-aged beer that I really had that kind of resonated with me was Goose Island's Bourbon County vanilla stout, and I remember drinking that and was like, oh my god, this beer is like this is like the best beer I've ever had. 2000, maybe it was 12 at the time. So then I would be like, okay, well, what can I do to like, it would be great if I had one of these with coffee in it, because I love coffee. And I was like, so that's the kind of like the basis for Summation was Bourbon County vanilla with coffee added to it. So then the quest was trying to find barrels. As a home brewer, obviously we can't use a full-size 53-gallon barrel. And I was brewing 10-gallon batches at the time, 5 or 10-gallon batches. So there's a small craft distillery in northern Florida, and they produce what they call like a Florida bourbon. And they were in 5-gallon barrels.
Is this Palm Ridge?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
So Palm Ridge was...
Listeners to the podcast are going to be familiar because we talked to Doug Dozark about the same a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, that seemed to be like the Florida's like avenue for small barrels.
Yeah.
And they would produce some great barrel-aged stout. Like the flavor profile that you would get out of those barrels was pretty great. And it was almost like telltale when you had a barrel-aged stout that came out of one of those barrels. So that was one of the barrels that I'd use, and then I'd continue to look online. And I think Adventures at Home Brewing, I used to buy a lot of barrels off of them. They had like 10 and 15-gallon barrels. So it was just a matter of like finding barrels. Actually, there's a Palm Ridge barrel right over there, the little guy. So then I would just look for different unique barrels. If I heard someone like through a podcast or whatever that said that there was like barrels on the site, or you could get barrels from there, I would like immediately reach out and see if you could get barrels. So barrel aging in these smaller barrels is much different than aging in a larger barrel. You do get an extraction, you get the much higher rate of extraction out of these barrels, obviously because of the surface area ratio. You don't get the same effect of aging as you would time-wise, though. That's one of the only, difficult things with using a smaller barrel. You do get the flavor, so you almost would have to like age your stouts a little bit longer and then put them in barrels so that they can round out a little bit more.
From a sensory perspective, how do you describe some of those effects of aging?
Well, obviously you're going to be pulling out a lot of the flavors of the oak. So
Sure.
You're getting some of the caramelized sugars in the wood. You'll get some of the vanillin. You'll get whatever spirit that was in the barrel passed. You'll get some of the flavors of that as well. And then you do get some of the oxidizing flavors, and I think that the beer becomes a little bit more softer and rounds out. It's not as sharp, as astringent. Like a stronger oxidizing flavor, excuse me, is like cardboard, you would say. Most people, it's not that bad, but it's a unique flavor. It's harder, I guess it's kind of hard to describe, but primarily aging in barrel, for me, always just gave a whole nother dimension to the beer, complexity, and allowed the beer to round itself out and soften. A lot of the beers that I would put in, obviously, they were imperial stouts, and they would go in pretty sweet. So you have the alcohol that you're picking up in the barrel that will help balance out the sweetness. You don't want to put a dry stout into a barrel. It becomes extremely boozy. Another thing.
What kind of goals did you have for gravity going into barrels?
So originally, when I first started, it was my beers would finish around like 10 Plato, which is like 1.040 specific gravity, and it's slowly gradually.
Boy, that seems so retro now. Gosh, yeah. Remember when we used to finish at 10 Plato?
Yeah, I know, and that's like people are like, wait a second, I start my beer at 10 Plato.
Yeah,
yeah. So it was kind of,
that's not thick enough now.
No. Now
that's right, thick with 2 C's.
Yeah, exactly. No, now we're like around 14 to 15 Plato, which I'd have to do the math on that, but
yeah,
it's like 1.06 or 7 or something like that.
Where do you tend to start to get to down there? I mean, I imagine if your goals are 12 to 13% and you got a fair amount of evaporation out of the barrel, you're brewing some pretty big stouts even though to start.
Yeah, so most of our stouts, they'll start at like 30 degrees Plato.
Okay.
We usually like 35 is kind of the highest it gets for us. I know there's some people that go a little bit higher than that, but that seems to be our sweet spot for what we do here, and the flavor profile, consistency, viscosity, and that we're aiming for. So which is extremely high as well.
Sure.
But yeah, it's kind of like a whole balancing act, which is one of the things that is difficult somewhat when brewing these beers is just having the perfect balance of alcohol, sweetness, and body, and then of course flavor. So that's the challenge.
For sure. Now you've also similar again, and I'm referencing this because everyone who listens to the podcast has generally already heard the Cycle Brewing podcast. Like Doug, you have custom built a brew house now in this new brewery that's built around these kinds of beers that you like to make. Tell me a little bit about some of that thought around designing the brew house, specifically knowing that you make a lot of these kind of big, high gravity beers.
Absolutely. So Doug is actually a good friend of mine, and I learned a lot from him about brewing these styles of beer, and specifically designing the brew house. He definitely had a hand in that, helping us out. I've brewed over at Doug's. I used to do the Gypsy thing, and we've done a collaboration, and so I'm pretty familiar with Doug and Eric's the brew house over there, and so yeah, our brew house we do the higher gravity beers, and instead of having to do multiple mashes, we are able to collect enough wort from one mash and send it to our kettle without having to do a second mash. So the oversized mash tun, which we have sized here, we sized it to collect about 10 barrels of wort. And the mash tun size probably is like a 36 barrel mash tun, something like that. So so the aspect ratio of it is one of the most important things, is that you need to have a specific aspect ratio. So our mash tun is just wide and stout and short. And
Sure.
so,
So even with that kind of capacity, it's not a vertical mash tun. Again, understanding what your mashes are going to look like in that kind of mash tun.
Right. So and it allows us to collect what we need to collect, and we're actually, since we've opened, we've dialed the system in pretty good, and we're collecting now like 12 or 14 barrels of wort off of our mash, which is great. So. And then, of course, having the second boil kettle here, we have 2 boil kettles. So after we do our first mash for our Imperial Stout, we do not sparge that beer or that mash, and we then go back, sparge, and we'll collect in our second kettle. We'll collect usually around 12 to 14 barrels of a second runnings stout, which has been. We've got that dialed down pretty good, and we're collecting usually around anywhere from 18 to 20 Plato wort. So it's
Off of your second runnings.
Second runnings. So it's pretty nice. Those beers we've been throwing on nitro, and we've gotten a lot of great feedback on those beers, which is great.
Is there any consideration that goes into that beer design, understanding that you're pulling a first runnings beer and a second runnings beer off of it, in terms of malt selection, in terms of maybe some of the kind of acrid character that the really dark roasted malts can kick off, any other kind of ingredient considerations that have gone into the overall design, since you're not just thinking about it as one beer, you're now thinking about it as 2 beers?
Correct. So what we do is we don't adjust our mash for the first runnings, but we do adjust the mash for the second runnings, because the first time that we actually took our second runnings, the beer came out like a brown ale. So we served it as a brown ale, and then the second time around, we ended up adding some debittered like black malt, or like Carafa Special, or Black Prince, whatever you prefer. But we throw in a couple bags of that into the mash tun right before we start sparging, just to pick up some color. Flavor profile, the flavors were there. It was just a matter of color, because we wanted that to be a stout that we were going to have on in the tasting room. So
no, that makes sense. How do your grist bills and designs for these beers adjust with the ingredients that you're going to add to them? You mentioned earlier that you're a big coffee fan, and for a lot of these beers, they're getting a heavy adjunct treatment with a variety of ingredients. How does that influence the way that you design base beers for these kinds of things, or do you just kind of keep a standard platform from which to play with ingredients off of?
It does. It depends on what I'm adding. Specifically for even the Berliner, I'll bump the alcohol, the ABV up on a Berliner if I'm doing a large fruit treatment.
Okay.
Because it just, you're going to have residual sugar, you've got all that fruit, and, if you have a 3.5% Berliner, it's just not, it's going to taste like fruit juice. I mean, it already almost does taste like fruit juice, but you're not going to get much alcohol, and, the base beer is not going to come out as much once you do that. For me personally, that's what I like to do. And then for stouts or beers that I'm adding a larger amount of coffee, or if I'm doing like a cacao treatment, I tend to stay away from any of the roasted malts, just because you're going to pick up some astringency from the coffee. You're going to get some from the cacao, and so I almost like substitute those ingredients for roasted malts. So it almost would be like brewing a porter versus, because it's really the large difference between porters and stouts is just you traditionally you add more like black prince or black malt or or roasted barley and things like that in stouts. So I tend to stay away from those or do very little percentage on those and substitute with debittered for color, because they're going to provide a decent amount of color. So that's what I do for coffee beers.
Is there like a working math equation in your head for that, or you just kind of wing it and say, yeah, I think a couple fewer percent of this and then a little bit more of that?
No, usually I usually do like maybe 2% of a roasted barley. I don't even use black malt at all. I just don't.
Right.
It's way too astringent for me. I just don't. I don't care for. I stopped using that a very long time ago.
Yeah.
Roasted barley is the only roasted malt that we use in our stouts.
Let's switch gears and talk a little bit about ingredients, non-barley, non-hops, non-water, the kind of adjunct ingredients and the way that you add those. You mentioned having kind of a culinary approach and a culinary inspiration for a lot of these beers. When you started doing it, that was still kind of a fresh thing. There were certainly other breweries that were doing it, but this quote-unquote pastry stout, as we know it now, was still kind of in its nascent, formation. Talk to me a little bit about how you, some of the processes that you went through in adding ingredients, figuring out how things work, what makes for successful ingredients, what was less successful, and how you've tweaked your process over the last few years of playing with some of these big, kind of ingredients and big stouts.
Sure. So it's all trial and error. So you first start and you go with real ingredients, or you get what you have at the grocery store, or you order something online. So for me, it was trial and error. If I would use
which is nice when you're brewing one barrel batches at a time. You can make a few trials and a few errors, and the stakes are pretty low.
Exactly, and I had a lot of that, and as a home brewer. And I knew that there were certain ingredients that just didn't stand out, and they didn't translate the way that I wanted them to in the beer. And it didn't matter how much or how little I used when brewing the beer. So I always would look to for alternative options. What I found seems to work like best for me when I'm using a specific ingredient is I'll use some ingredients, the flavor will come across, but you won't get the aroma. And so you really have, if you want certain flavors to pop, the best option for me is using a small amount of extract to get the aromas that you want to get out of a beer. So
I just had to gasp.
Yeah, I know. The E word.
God.
It's only certain ingredients that seem to constantly, like, for me, if I tell you, I'm using an ingredient in the beer, I want it to come across as, that it's in the beer. It's hard for me to, you get, for something not to come across and you're like, oh, I don't get any maple in here, or I don't get, or this doesn't taste like, strawberry or whatever. So it's just certain things that sometimes you end up having to use a little extract in conjunction with the real fruit or spice to help make it really pop and come across as that ingredient.
They almost have different kind of expression modes, where that extract is a almost primarily like aromatic, channel, where to get that pop in the nose, it takes extract for that. But to get that feel and the flavor
Right.
and that kind of richness, you go for the actual ingredient, and it's this combination of the two that seem to produce the most kind of bright and intense character together.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. Yeah, they go hand in hand, and like honestly, if I've always made beers that I like and that I think people like, and seem to have some pretty good success with it, and so it's kind of worked, the way that I've been doing it. And
are there some coffees or some extract methods for coffee that you really enjoy with your beers?
Coffee is definitely something that I've prided myself on using from the beginning. Just quality coffee. I really enjoy coffee myself, so using specific, like origin specific types of coffee, having a specific roast on the beans, working with
what does that roast look like? I know there are some that like lighter and brighter roasts. I've certainly talked to others that are not fans of that kind of thing. Where do you kind of land in that spectrum?
For me, the light roast just after like first crack is where I really enjoy the flavors of the coffee and beer. And then if you want a more expressive coffee, like a traditional, coffee smell that, if you just like walk into a coffee shop and you hit that coffee smell hits you in the face, that's the origin that really determines what that smell is comes out in the beer. You have some origins where they taste like blueberries and peach, and you get like strawberry and very unique flavors,
right.
And they're not as aromatic. And then you have some origins that are just like your typical robust, like chocolate and nutty and aroma and flavor profile. So for me, that's what I like to use is specific origin coffee, and work with some of the best coffee roasters in the nation, probably. Actually, I know our buddies in California. Going out there, Mostra's 6-year
Sure.
anniversary is this month, and they recently just won Coffee Roastery of the Year from one of the large publications. So it was a pretty big award. And I've been working with Mike for a long time, for probably over 6 years or 5-6 years or something like that. So it's important to have to get your coffee fresh roasted, to work with your local roaster. Our guys that we have here is Argyle Coffee, and Manny makes like some of the best coffee ever. And whatever I need, he can roast up a batch and specific origins. If I talk to him about a specific style of beer and what I'm looking to have, he knows exactly what goes best in those beers, or would work best with the flavor profile that the beer has. So
what does that addition method then look like in the brew house for that coffee?
So for us, originally what I used to do is more or less just steep the beer in the coffee. So I'd have big muslin bags or nylon sacks,
right.
And
ground or whole bean.
Originally I did a whole bean as a home brewer, but then once I started buying a lot,
once you had to pay for it as a commercial brewer.
Once I started buying a lot more coffee, and really really good coffee, I find the extraction from coarse ground coffee is the best for me personally. And if you were,
is that time or a quality thing to it?
Time is huge.
Yeah.
Again, because you have more surface area that you're exposing the beer to. But also, if Manny is like a guru, and I talked to him about it, and he's just like, dude, don't waste your time using whole beans. It's not like there's a almost like a skin or like a layer of the bean that prevents like extraction, like and he's like, it's not, it's kind of like a waste.
Yeah.
So, and you have to use, when I was doing it, you had to use like 2 to 3 times the amount of coffee beans to get the flavor you would get from some ground beans.
Yeah.
So probably actually even more than that. But
If only you could make some second use coffee off of that after you've extracted it into beer.
we've thought about doing that here actually. So now what we do is we recirculate our beer on the coffee.
Okay.
So we have like a little hop back, and we hook it up to our fermenter, and then we run it and recirculate on the beans, and that extraction process usually takes us about I want to say 6 hours, 6 to maybe 8 hours.
Yeah.
So
Talk to me a little bit about maple syrup. That's another difficult ingredient for a lot of brewers to use. Obviously, it ferments out pretty quickly. It's hard to get some residual flavor off of that, even though everyone knows what maple flavor is. And so, using the actual ingredient can be a challenge, and yet the extracty kind of approach tends to, can go the other direction and just feel not real. Talk to me about getting good results using kind of maple syrup as an ingredient.
So yeah, maple syrup has been a tricky one.
And I'm just asking, because you've got Lumberjack Day coming up here for the brewery with, and you've got a prominent beer that's well known and respected that uses both that and coffee as an ingredient.
Yes. So maple's a tough one. As a home brewer, I used to add, like a quart of maple syrup to 5 gallons, and then would double it, and it got to the point where it was like a gallon of maple syrup and 5 gallons of beer, and it was just like it.
It seems like your gravity's way out of whack and something like that.
Yeah, depending on when you add it, obviously you're going to ferment out. It's highly fermentable, so you'll ferment out the sugars, which will in turn scrub out a lot of the flavor of the maple. But the maple is something also that I like to use, where I will use some of it. I just released Even More Lumberjack, which was a collaboration I did with Yepa from Evil Twin. And that beer, we ended up adding the maple syrup in secondary. So the beer basically was completely done being fermented. We had cold crashed it and dropped yeast out, and then added about, I think it was 40 gallons of maple syrup in 200 gallons or 210 gallons of beer. So it was a ridiculous amount of maple syrup.
Yeah.
And then we transferred that into bourbon barrels and let that sit for almost 2 years in barrels. And you get a lot of, it's extremely sweet, and it's very decadent, and it's like definition of pastry stout. We did add a large amount of coffee, and Brazilian coffee, which is a very chocolate, it's got beautiful flavor, pairs perfectly with this style. So, and it's extremely sweet. So that's one way of trying to do it. The thing is that if you're looking for pure maple syrup flavor, or if you're looking for like Aunt Jemima's and Log Cabin flavor maple syrup,
sure,
which I think probably most of us grew up on. I know I didn't have a whole lot of like real maple syrup in my childhood. So the nostalgia of that aroma and that smell, which is almost like that buttery rich, and which doesn't smell anything like real maple syrup.
Right.
You have to use extract to get that. So you can go another route and use extract as well, and in conjunction with using some maple syrup. So you retain some of the sweetness, and you have some of the maple, and then that extract will get you the nose on the beer. But so Yeah, the maple's a tricky one. It's really depends on which way you want to go.
Are there any other interesting ingredients that you really enjoy using in stouts that you find just kind of create an unexpected joy in these big beers?
Vanilla beans are pretty amazing. I really love what vanilla beans do. They're extremely expensive, but they're worth it. And if you use them properly too, you can get a little bit more extraction out of them, like we do. We recirculate on our vanilla beans as well.
What's your processing look like? Are you scraping them out? Are you chopping them up? What's the?
We end up slicing the beans in half.
Okay.
Is all we do. So we'll just like slice them completely in half, and then we don't scrape any of the caviar out or anything like that. After we cut them in half, we end up we throw them in a Ziploc bag and sanitize them. And
some people even do that with sous vide, huh?
Yeah. So which is a pretty cool and unique way to do it. And then we'll throw them in our hot back in a nylon bag that's been sanitized, and we'll recirculate on them. And we usually get extraction in about 72 hours, which is pretty good.
Yeah.
So, so vanilla beans.
What kind of temperature do you keep the beer at for this kind of thing?
For the vanilla beans, you want it warmer.
Okay.
Because the warmer something is, you're going to extract more flavor.
Sure.
Coffee beans, you want it colder because you'll start pulling out some green pepper and astringency out of the coffee beans. So usually after we transfer the beer from fermenter into bright tank for the vanilla beans, the beer will probably be at around 60 degrees. And then for the coffee, we crash it down to the low 30s.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think that's very important. Some people don't. They age the beer on coffee room temperature, and
sure.
Cold brew is made that way, room temperature. So
yeah,
it just depends on what you like to do.
No, it does. I mean, that's interesting that you'd grind it, but then you condition it in an extremely cold temperature, and it looks like you're balancing in a different direction than the way that other people balance, and that's if it works for you, it works for you.
Yeah, I think we pull out more of the pure flavor of the coffee, and my experience is that I do not have as I don't get the off flavors that I normally taste in other beers. So
sure. Before we get out of here, I want to talk to you a little bit. I mean, we've now talked about stouts for a long while, but I really want to talk about your approach to German beers also. Mm-hmm. Found it fascinating that you've got not just one, not just two, but I think at least 4 different German styles, from lagers and more, and lagers and ales for that matter, mm-hmm. and have kind of made sure that there is there are these historical kind of brewing styles from that German brewing tradition here for sale in your tap room, in addition to the kind of heavily hopped double IPAs, single IPA, hazy IPAs, in addition to these kind of pastry forward, big flavorful stouts, and in addition to the kind of heavily fruited, sour, kettle sour beers.
Sure.
Talk to me a little bit about why that is, why balance in that kind of way, and what is it, is there a market for that? Is that just a philosophical thing that says, hey, we want to drink these beers and we're going to make these beers? What's the reasoning behind that?
There's a lot of that. We've been able to brew a beer that we like to drink, and as a brewer, I find pilsners and other lagers to be extremely crushable and enjoyable, and I think also that there seems to be a little bit of a trend that is moving into pilsners and lagers in the craft beer community. Every beer fest that I go to, all of the brewers were all like, okay, who brought the pilsner?
Sure.
Where's the lager at? You can only drink so much
There's a reason they invite Bierstadt Lagerhaus to Hunupoo Day now, right? Just so the brewers have something to drink.
Exactly. So that's that. And then for Lumberjack Day, I've asked every brewery to bring a session beer, something that's like crushable, a lager, or something that they're really proud of. Which is we did not have that last year. So last year it was like the average beer probably was like 10% ABV or something. There was a lot. And it's nice to be able to break up your palate and try some sessionable beers, and a lot of people are making some really, really good ones. So, but yeah, so we like to drink them. Almost more importantly, our guests like to drink them. You know, Dania Beach is actually the oldest town in Broward County. It was founded in the early 1900s, and so we have a pretty large local community here that come in, and a lot of them love our Pilsner, our Red Ale, our Vienna Lager. So we get to make them too, which is great. You know, a lot of people they're jealous because they couldn't sell, you know, a Pilsner in their tasting room, or they couldn't sell like a Red Ale in their tasting room, or a Vienna Lager. So it's pretty nice to be able to have that. We do have a lot of like Europeaners that travel here. You know, obviously Florida being a huge tourist industry. So we definitely get a lot of that as well. But so we get to make some of these unique styles, and then of course just coming off of Oktoberfest in September, we did a couple unique beers for that. So it's been fun. You know, we like to not only brew for ourselves, but brew for people and that come in and enjoy good, easy drinking beers.
Well, I guess it makes it simple when you have a potential new customer that walks in and says, well, I really like Bud Light. I really like light lager. You know, I'm like, oh, we got a beer for you. You know, it makes it a very simple.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. We've done a Mexican lager in the past as well. And I foresee us doing a lot more lagers in the future.
Yeah.
So it's fun, and they taste great.
Sure. So, looking forward into the future for Three Sons, what does success look like for you? When will you know that you've achieved the success that you set out to achieve?
I don't think that that point in your life should ever come. I think you should definitely constantly strive and try to do new things, and I know for myself, I'd love to get into distilling, even making meads as well, wine. So I don't know, success. Yeah, it's.
You think as soon as you achieve it here in the beer world, or whatever you deem that to be, that you're going to find something else to be, you know, to create that challenge for you, just so you keep striving towards something?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'll ever feel that way, that I've like achieved success. I think, you know, it'll just be I'll be happy with things here, and then want to do something somewhere else, or get into something else, or maybe open another brewery somewhere else, or, you know, it'll be constant, you know.
Just a restless creativity and curiosity that can never fully be satiated.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Just one thing after another, hopefully, if I'm lucky.
It does not sound very restful.
No. Well, you find time, and you know, it's a passion. You enjoy doing things, and it's kind of, you know, I homebrewed for 13 years, and then finally was able to open up my own brewery. It was kind of interesting to be able to get paid for your hobby. So it's been fun. It's been a long, crazy road and a lot of work, but yeah, I definitely would just I don't foresee myself resting anytime soon. And so,
fair enough. If people want to learn more about Three Sons, where do they find you out on the internets and in real life?
So yeah, we're here. I work 6 days a week here at the brewery. So you can come out to Dania Beach and share a beer, or you can shoot me an email. It's Corey, Corey, at threesonsbrewingco.com is my email. So more than happy to talk with anyone about recipe development, designs, any questions on barrel aging, or using adjuncts. I'm an open book.
Well, I appreciate you talking to us about it today, Corey.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for coming on. I appreciate you being here and your interest, and everyone.
Well, thank you. Before we get out of here, G&D Chillers sets the standard for quality, service, and dedication to their customers' craft. Old Orchard invites you to step up your fruit game. SS Brewtech has the people and skill sets you demand from your supplier of pro brewing equipment. And Second Kitchen helps keep customers in your tap room longer. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please go to beerandbrewing.com, click on the subscribe button, and become a magazine subscriber. We'd appreciate your support, and you'll hear more about Corey and other brewers like him making some of the best craft beer in the world today. And, who knows, maybe we can even get Corey to share a homebrew recipe with us one of these days. Again, thanks for joining me on the podcast, Corey.
Absolutely. No, thank you for having me.
Cool. Cheers.
Cheers.
This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.